Hello and good evening to everybody. I'm Dr. Julia Royston of BK Royston Publishing and the host of Live Your Best Life. I am bringing you a special edition sponsored by Envision Radio and Julia Royston Enterprises. We're super excited to be with you tonight. We're racism and teachable moments. Have we had quite a few teachable moments over the past year? But before we get started with the conversation, I want to introduce the panel that I have with me this evening. Quite an illustrious and highly accomplished panel that I have with me this evening. And I am super excited of what's going to come of our conversation this evening. First up is Pastor Terry Jones. He is also on Envision Radio. And he can be heard, so you think, every Thursday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then Miss Renee Arethel and Miss Kisa Hoki. I hope that I pronounced that correct. They're two mamas and a mustard seed, heard every Tuesday at 11 a.m. And then Mr. Mark Gunn, heard on Saturdays. Mark Gunn Media is heard on Envision Radio on Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then outside the Envision radio.com family, I have brought in Dr. Daniel Williams Jr., who is the author of Why Do Americans Hate Americans? And then Dr. Ava Greenwell, who has written a phenomenal media and the Black women who control what is seen on television. Ladies Leading is her latest book, about to hit the be released very, very shortly. And Dr. Daniel Williams Jr. So I'm so glad that you're with us. Pastor Terry, first tell me where people can find you on social media besides envision-radio.com. Where can people find you on social media and your website?
Okay, well, you can find me on Instagram at @so_u, the letter U _think Pastor Terry. That's what it is. You can find me on Instagram, as well as you can find us on Facebook with So You Think with Pastor Terry on Facebook. We have YouTube channel, So You Think with Pastor Terry on YouTube. We're kind of all over the place right now. And we are about to embark on a book. It's about to be published. Actually, sorry, Julia. We just got the artwork today from the publisher.
Yay!
So it'll be out. It's going to be called Stepping into the Unknown with Faith, Getting Out. It's actually a 30-day devotional. It's going to be coming out in April. And so we're really excited about that. It's going to be with Water Spring Publishing out of Mississippi.
Awesome. Miss Renee and Kisa, tell us where we can find you on social media.
Yes, Miss Renee.
Oh, well, the easiest thing to do is go to our website, twomamasandamustardseed.com. And we have, like Pastor Terry, we have several social media channels, and you can find all the links right there. So
Awesome. Mark Gunn, where are you on social media?
I am ubiquitous everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. I'm sure I'm leaving something off, but all of that you can find me easiest by going to my website at markgunmedia.com.
Awesome. Dr. Williams?
My website called focusonme.us. Focusonme.us. Also, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube,
and Twitter.
Yes.
Everywhere
all the major social media on. Yes.
Focusonme.us. Awesome. Dr. Greenwell?
So you can find me on ladiesleading.net. That's the website for the book, which is now available. ladiesleading.net.
Yay! Everywhere. Okay, so I preface this by saying we've probably all experienced racism, correct? Yes?
Correct.
Yeah.
One way, shape, or form. Racism, sexism, of course, I'm a big girl. I always have been a big girl. So, sometimes, people get uncomfortable with the size of people. But I think one of our first questions is, what is your definition of racism? Anybody want to start?
Well, I was just going to say, I think historically we think of racism as some of the films that we've seen on people, people who've been enslaved, and that, horrible violence against Black people. And that is certainly horrible. But I think today what we know is that racism is much more covert, much more subtle than what we traditionally have talked about in terms of racism. And we also talk about racism as a system, it's a system. I mean, it works the way it was designed to work, right? And that means that a lot of times people who are of color, people who are women, get discriminated against, or there's bias, conscious and unconscious bias, that's targeted at them solely because of their identity, either of how they look, how they sound, even how they speak. I run a program in South Africa, and oftentimes there's vocal discrimination as well, depending on your accent. You can be discriminated against that. So I'll leave it at that, because I know Dr. Williams had also some ideas on that as well.
Thank you so much. Obviously, there are different definitions of racism. I studied racism intensively in graduate school, as well as poverty. Racism is based on economics, race, and oppression. Racism is predicated on hatred. Anyone who has political or economic power over someone,
There you go.
based on his or her race, can be considered as a racist. For example, years ago, a restaurant chain had treated African-American customers differently than they treated non-African-American customers. And they were investigated by the federal government to see what happened. So they sent some undercover government agents to investigate as African-Americans, and found out that, yes, indeed, they were racist. They had African-American customers to pay in advance before they were able to sit down to eat.
Right.
And if non-African-Americans came while they were waiting to be seated or served, they were allowed to go in the restaurant and receive services. This restaurant did not hire any African-Americans in their corporation or in their management, and they were very reluctant to hire anyone who was African-American in their restaurant corporation. So that is a classic example of racism: economics, race, and oppression.
Anybody else want to add?
Yeah, basically, if you go by the dictionary definition, it's to sum it up, it's prejudice plus power. Like the doctor said, if you are able to affect the outcome of someone's life based on your prejudices or your bigotry, that is the very definition of racism, plain and simple.
But do you find that, when we say racism, of course, when someone says racism or racist, or especially when you say racist, we automatically are thinking of ethnicity. But in other cultures, that may not even be the case. So in the US, when you say racism, you're automatically thinking African Americans against non-African Americans solely. Do you agree?
Yeah.
So I would agree, but I would also say that in an international or global context, it can mean a lot of other things.
Exactly.
I was saying this program I run in South Africa, they have 4 categories of race: Black, white, colored, and Indian.
Right.
And so historically, there's been discrimination against colored people, and still is today in South Africa, as there is discrimination against Indians who also are living in South Africa. So I think if anybody's read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, where she makes this connection between, depending on the caste that you are associated with in India, she's trying to make those connections to also race,
Right.
here in the United States and globally. So, it's, to me, it's thinking about how do we treat people differently. I mean, we just had this incident in Atlanta with the shootings, and talking about whether this is a hate crime against Asian American women, and how should we be dealing with this. So this idea of hate, the hatred of people just because of who they are, an identity that they can't change, I think those are more obvious kinds of discrimination. But I would argue that while that is, we still see those, I think it's the more unconscious bias that continues to plague the US and the world that we also really have to begin to address. And I think we've done that in some ways when we talk about white privilege. I mean, one of the things that Sharon Osbourne seemed to really take offense to is the fact that she was being accused of being racist.
Right.
She couldn't believe that she was a racist person. And so part of what we have to do, I think, is educate young people more about what is racism. How can you perpetrate racism even without, and then also not to be afraid of that word, because I think a lot of times people are so afraid of being labeled a racist that they just shut down and they can't even have a conversation, an intelligent conversation about, well, okay, you might not label yourself as a racist, but you are participating in a racist system. And because you're participating in it, you are complicit with it.
Exactly. And I think that conversation, I'll get back to that in just a moment. Pastor Terry, add?
And I want to kind of go with that. It's like when you look at people have developed these racist views over time. It's not something that just they woke up and it just happened. These are things that people have lived with, have grown up in. I think somebody was mentioned earlier about white privilege, and how because people grow up in having that privilege, it's not recognizable to them because it's a part of their everyday life.
Right.
And so these are so when we have these conversations, it's going to be very important that everyone come in open and realize, something, I may have some biases that have been influenced by the media, that have been influenced by movies, television, things like
my own home or my own family, or
right, those types of things. Because I had to really look at myself as an African American male and look and say, okay, where am I as far as what have I grown up with? Because as you know, Julia, we grew up in the East End.
Yes,
there were some things that we experienced that some people, that live down in the West End didn't experience,
right?
And it didn't affect our views. So we grew up a little different, than some of our counterparts in different parts, even the city of Louisville,
Right.
So that's it.
But so I wanted to ask specifically Renee and Kisa, because they have children, small children, and so when we were talking about how you're raised and how you have to have those critical conversations. I have no biological children of my own, but I have taught. I'm a retired teacher for 22 years, so you have to have those very sensitive conversations. So how do you ladies with younger ones approach those conversations?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we all know about the talk you have to have with your sons, we have with our son and daughter, and we have a younger child now, just how to move and operate as a Black person in America. There's just certain ways you have to be. There's a certain respect you have to give. There's a certain way you have to walk as not to intimidate. I mean, those conversations start early. I had 2 older brothers, and all of those conversations had with my brothers by my parents are things that were instilled in me that, of course, I passed down to my children. And, this is we don't want them to have to grow up in this world, but we want to see our children come home every day. So it's like, there's a certain way you have to move and be, as a minority in America. And so we start the conversations early with our kids.
Renee?
Yeah, thank you, Kisa. And I'm so grateful for Kisa because I'm a white woman, in case you all couldn't tell. And I have 2 Black children, 2 Black sons. And for me, I think about sometimes, especially lately, I think about Pastor Albert Tate out in Monrovia, California, if you all know who he is. And he likes to say, I'm a recovering racist. And he also talks about how, and he's a Black man, and he also talks about how racism was discipled into us and how it has to be discipled out. So I think about my own journey as a mom to two Black boys. And I have had to come face to face with the bias that I didn't realize was inside of me from a very young age. And so it's been, Keith and I've had two different situations and experiences as mothers. But I think for me, I remember when George Floyd was killed, I literally wept in my little boy's bed as he took a nap, because I thought, well, first of all, as a white person, I'm unequipped to handle this. And so I need people like Kisa to come alongside me. And second of all, is this really still the world we live in? How does this continue to happen? So,
So can I say also, I am the mother of a young Black male child who is 22 years old. And when he was 12 years old, he was actually followed by the police in our community. And as he entered his driveway, handcuffed, because he fit the description of someone who had burglarized a home nearby. I happened to be in the backyard at the time and opened the gate to see two white police officers putting handcuffs on my 12-year-old son. So as you can imagine, that was a very traumatic event that happened about 10 years ago. And I'm happy to say that my son survived. I know a lot of young people don't survive that. And having been a former reporter, I knew that I couldn't create too much of a scene because it could be detrimental to my son and to me. And so every time there is another incident, of a Black man who is murdered by police, it has an impact on me. It has an impact, more importantly, on my son. So I think from a psychological perspective, what America really hasn't come to full grips with is the impact that not just that kind of racism has, but everyday racism, right? It's the death by 1,000 cuts.
Yes.
And so when I see something like that happening on television, I have to say, it's like, it makes me sick. I mean, literally, I get butterflies in my stomach because I feel like, okay, here we go again. When is it going to stop?
Right.
And so any of you who are parents of young people, particularly a Black male child, you have got to be praying all the time that when they go out, they will come back the same way they left. And so it's a sad commentary because, to be honest, I am not optimistic that it's going to get much better quickly.
yeah.
And so I just, you just have to, again, when your children leave, you just have to pray that they come back safely.
Can I jump in, Julia? One of the things that I think was really the systematic piece of it, and how even from education to the law enforcement to government, everything. The system was not built for us.
No.
And the messages that are being sent, like today, I just saw something today that dealt with the whole Black men get killed and white men get arrested.
Right.
Like what happened in Colorado. I mean, I saw it showed there was a meme that showed all the Black men and Black women that have been killed, and then when you have someone that they weren't even armed, but then when you have a white armed person, they get taken to McDonald's.
Right.
Those types of things, and the messages that sends me as a Black male is that I'm not safe.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not armed, but I'm not safe.
Right.
When I look at that, I'm seeing the system, the policing system, the whole justice system. That tells me that I'm not safe even with the police officers. I'm not safe in front of a judge. I'm not safe. So I don't feel comforted by any of those pieces.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and I know I'm gonna go back to Mark Gunn and especially Dr. Greenwell, because I know they've worked specifically in media. So does the media fuel this? Do you feel like that there are producers in a conference room that say, okay, we've got to make sure that everybody knows that the statistics of Black men are this, and non African American people, they're done this way. Does that help fuel it, or is it raise awareness to try to decrease it? I mean, what is the mindset when we're talking about
So, Julia,
ladies leading?
Yeah. So first, I would say I think unfortunately these are stories that actually have not been covered enough in the past, and that's one of the reasons why white people in particular now are coming forward saying, I didn't know that this was necessarily disproportionately happening. So I think the problem actually has been that the media have not covered this kind of disproportionality in treatment by the police in the past. I mean, it feels like, it's being covered ad nauseum now, but the problem is, the media sort of made us think, well, it's all equal, it's equal opportunity in terms of how people get stopped. And we know what changed that. To me, the cell phone has become the truth serum of what's actually out there.
Oh, yeah.
If you think about Walter Scott back in South Carolina, back in, I can't remember the year because there've been so many of them now, but that, if I recall, was one of the first times where somebody had, I mean, obviously we can go back to 1990 and the LA riots, but in terms of individuals, running from police and getting shot in the back, I remember that video as being the real truth serum that said, no, this is what Black people have been talking about all along, that Black people get shot and killed when they run from the police, and that doesn't happen to white men who run from the police. And so now that we have the evidence, the video evidence, it seems like we're now covering this story a lot more. And I would say that's a good thing, because as sick as I am every time I see that, if that is hidden, then people won't know that this discrimination is going on, and they will think everything's just fine. So I think we need, and so now the issue is we need to cover more of the systemic racism that isn't as easily captured on camera, that we know happens every day.
Mark, I'm sorry, were you going to add?
And a part of it is a lot of the minutia, the nuances of covering racism from a television mindset just isn't sexy.
Exactly. It's not visual.
It's not visual. And even if you can give these statistics, you can give all the video footage in the world. And I have these conversations every day on social media. The pushback has always been, well, what happened before? What did he do? You can show a video of a Walter Scott being shot in the back, running away from a police officer, and there's going to be some idiot that will still continue to question it. The problem that I have, and this is a problem that I don't mind saying because I say it every day, is the denial that this country continues to live in when it comes to dealing with racism. I'm old enough to remember the first time that people were seeing water hoses and dogs being put on people, and the shock and the outrage, and we've got to do something. And then we have fallen into this status quo where nobody wants to upset the apple cart, that the media included to a point. And now that we're seeing it all over again, it's like Will Smith said, racism isn't getting worse, it's getting filmed. Media no longer has a choice when it comes to covering these stories. Because if they don't do it, you've got some kid on the corner who has his own website.
He just his phone. All you need is the phone, dude. You just push that record button.
Exactly.
It goes viral in seconds. And I think that is just like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that. And then, and then the convenience of some police officers just turning the body cameras off and like, oh, it didn't happen, but boo, JoJo across the street got it.
Right.
And Ray down the way got it. And Shanika got it that other way. They've got it. And so I think you're underestimating the power of not only social media, but it's out there. We're seeing it with our own two eyes. And I realize that conspiracy theories say, oh, well, and try to spin it. But, go ahead, Renee. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Renee.
Well, I was going to say too, if you look, I've been in a newsroom before in my career, and if you look at how we focus on a Black life in general, especially when a Black life is lost, I've been disheartened and disgusted the last week. There have been 7 mass shootings across the states, and we've covered 2. And I started a spreadsheet in my spare time to keep track of these 7 shootings and the information coming out. And I'm not certain yet, but I'm almost certain that the 5 we haven't covered have taken place in either Black neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, and we haven't covered them. And so that's really, that's crazy to me. And then the second thing I was going to say is, once again, the worthiness of a Black life and how we portray that in the media. If a Black man or a Black woman is killed by just a regular citizen on the street, how do we portray that in the media? I remember I had a white friend who was killed several years ago, and I love him. He was a great man. But the way they portrayed that was much different than how the media portrays the murder of a Black person.
Right. It's, this guy was a choir boy, deacon in the church, blah, 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 blah. The Black person, they go back to his juvenile record. He stole out of the 7-Eleven when he was 3 years old.
That's right.
The way that we are covered is a whole lot different.
Right.
That's right.
I mean, it's a prime example. Let's look at what happened on January the 6th.
Right.
I mean, the way that was covered. I mean, you have people going in, storming, trying to take over the government. And the majority of the I'd say about 99% of the popular group that was there was white.
Right.
The way they were portrayed as patriots.
Yeah.
Okay, but then you have Black Lives Matter during the summer, and they were called thugs.
Right.
They were called, by people in leadership. So that's why it goes back to the whole thing about power. Who has the power, and who frames this? And during the summer, it was being framed as a whole bunch of thugs. And look at how wild they are. Give me the power, I will shut them down. But that wasn't being said on January the 6th.
Yeah.
So you talked about systems too. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Julia.
No, what'd you say? I'm sorry, Keith. I'm sorry.
He mentioned earlier about systems, and on the podcast we've talked about educational disparities, healthcare disparities, redlining, the workplace, the church, even. And so, these systems have been built, and like Renee said, have been discipled into us. These racist ideals have started, they have been perpetuated through those avenues.
Exactly. And, Pastor Terry, so because this is a international station that we're on, and this will be and Vision Dash Radio is international and goes around the world. So we have to I'll quantify this by saying, but so Pastor Terry and I in Louisville, Kentucky, it's segregated, but integration is such that you needed 15% of the population has to be a minority, because that was how they blended the schools and integrated the schools. So Pastor Terry and I were that 15% that was never bused to another school across town 2 hours. Okay. So therefore, I was in, quote unquote, back in the day, the county schools, the suburb schools. Now, the last 22 years of teaching, I was in the downtown school and I was in the Southwest school. I knew that, that I had been educated in an affluent area. And this, and so I stood in the office one day and it said, we're back where we were in 1970. It's still the West and the South. It's still getting less than the East. The East is always going to get what they need, but we're still out here begging in the South and the West. I mean, it's the same as the disparity. And of course, my school was integrated. It was not all Black schools. So we couldn't say it was even a matter of race. We're back to what Dr. Williams said at the top, economics. It's about the money.
Yes, it is.
Who has the money? And there were plenty of non-African American students in that school, but we were 94% free and reduced. So therefore that meant everybody was at a certain socioeconomic level.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it was the projects, whether it was the house, whether it was the trailer, whatever, the socioeconomic level, racism there went back to the basics of economics, where you were, your Wi-Fi went down when it rained. I mean, now, oh yeah, oh yeah,
Julia,
oh yeah, it wasn't no joke out there. I mean, it was clearly the haves and the have-nots, and that was not a nationality issue. That was clearly money. That's all that was all day.
Which boils down to equity versus equality.
Right.
You know, we're talking about making the playing field, equity. We want equity, not just equality. We want equity. We want everybody to have the same access to internet. But it's about power. It's about money. That's what it's about. Money.
Yeah, it's about power and money. Okay, so we've had some great comments. I want to show those real quick. Comments that we've had, and they're enjoying the discussion, and thank you for joining in. Dr. Greenrow, your comment real quick, and then I'm got to move on. We've got to
I just wanted to go back to something that what Pastor Terry was saying and some others, and that is one of the things we have to remember is the news media have a history of being racist, right? Because they are owned, for the most part, by white people. And so it's just another one of those institutions, just like prisons, just like schools, just like those other things. So let's think back to 1827, the first Black newspaper, Freedom's Journal. Their whole focus was to say, we're not getting a fair treatment by the white newspaper, so we have to start our own. And so consequently, when you do have people of color in those roles, and that's what my book is about, Black women who are controlling the narrative, you do see a difference in how they think about the story and how it's shaped, because they come from an experience of having, family members who've been surveilled by the police, or nieces and nephews who've been followed by the police. So understanding that and putting those people in newsrooms makes a difference. Unfortunately, because these news organizations still have not reached parity in terms of the population, we still are having this conversation about why there's not enough diversity in newsrooms today. And, there'll be a little bit of pressure on them, then the pressure goes off, the numbers go up a little bit, and then the numbers go down. And so there's this constant struggle to try to get newsroom employers, but also those who are editors and news managers, because that's really where the power resides. It resides with the managers, not just with that individual who decided to cover that story. So that's just the point that I wanted to make about the news media, that it's no different than any other institutions that we have.
So it's systematic. So it's all about the system.
Right.
And it's important for consumers, because the question always is, okay, so what are we going to do about it? It's important for consumers to also be more demanding about the people who are editors, the people who are managers, the people who are covering their neighborhoods, and to speak up, to email them, to say, I didn't like that story that somebody did because it was, biased against XYZ. And sometimes I think people don't know that they have that kind of power.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so they need to exercise that power.
Exactly.
And quickly to that point, every media outlet that is governed by the Federal Communications Commission has what they call a public file. It is on display for anybody to see. They have to maintain it. So the quickest way and the best way for you to express your displeasure or any concerns is to do it through email or through a handwritten letter. They have to give you access to those files because it's very important when it comes time for license renewal. So keep that in mind as well.
Well, we thank you for that, because we had no idea. Here's some comments. Thank you, Taylor Pearson. Thank you, darling. And Ms. Muhammad Stacy, thank you so much for being with us and your great comments as well. So I want to switch gears. We're going back to the Cheryl Underwood and Sharon Osbourne situation, because that was first off, it was on live television,
right?
And secondly, it was it really had international connotations, but it was on live television. And there was honestly, there was really no spin to it, until afterwards and the comments that have come out. So I just want to start off at the top. So did Cheryl Underwood handle herself well with that
Absolutely.
whole situation?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. In
I've
fact,
known
she held
Cheryl-
back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, she
She
showed
did.
a tremendous amount of restraint,
Yes, she did.
grace, professionalism, because she had to.
She had to.
Mhm.
But she just, she walked that thing the right way, and
Yes.
even forgiving. I mean, I know we are quick to forgive, and some people don't like that, but her faith was on display. She was like, this was a teachable moment for her.
Right.
And as a
Right.
woman of faith myself, I mean, you ultimately want to forgive, whether Sharon was sincere or not.
Mhm.
I love the stance that Cheryl took.
Yeah.
I've known Cheryl personally for years, and what you saw on display that day is the woman that she actually is. So it doesn't surprise me the way that she's reacting to everything. In fact, she said in a recent interview about the whole thing that she was able to sleep. She wasn't stressed. And
Right.
I'm like, okay, yeah, that's her.
Yep.
That's her girl.
That's her.
But then, so the Sharon Osbourne outburst, what did they tell you? I mean, the sheer panic of that lady. I was just,
That was white
I
fragility all over the place.
yeah, I mean, just like, tell
Mhm.
me, I don't know. I mean, you didn't see through that, you didn't see any of that. You didn't, because there is a way to defend and remain friends with somebody, but you don't necessarily agree with their behavior. I mean, I love Pastor Terry, known Pastor Terry for 20 years, but who's to say we've agreed on everything?
Right.
And if I saw him, which I haven't, but if I ever saw him in the wrong, I'd be like, okay, he's not perfect. And Terry, you was out of order that day, and not be so. I mean, I agree with friendship, loyalty. I'm there all day long, but there's sometimes when it's wrong, it's just wrong, or that you agree. And and to me, when I was watching it, it was more like Cheryl was asking, so you co-sign? So you're co-signing with your friend? And so it's and so I could just see the sheer panic on her face. So your thoughts moving forward. I mean, now they've been on hiatus. Now it could be legal connotations. What does that look like moving forward? How do we continue to have the race conversation in the media live?
Can I say
What
something?
does that look like? Sure.
I'm gonna throw something on that. When you look at Sharon Osbourne's reaction, her reaction was gauged by a lot of things. If you really think about it, she's thinking about, okay, I'm the host of this show, my job. I'm being drugged on an issue that is really a sensitive issue right now, and if I handle it wrong, this could be the end of me. So she's dealing with a whole lot of Sharon Osbourne. I'm not trying to give her an excuse, but we've got to understand where all that type of stuff that's going on in a person's head. And the reasons why is because I've had those type of sensitive discussions. My co-owner of my business, he's white. We've been in business for over 21 years. And we have these conversations, and he gets like that. And he really gets that panicked, like, kind of when we have those types of discussions, when I'm pointing out those things. Oh, so you're co-signing what the former president did, or what he said. You know what I'm saying? So I've got, as a black male, I've got to realize, okay, the response that I'm getting is where it's coming from and what it's based in. And really be able to handle that tactfully, like my soror did, like Cheryl Underwood did. She's a Zayda.
I'd like to say something, if I may.
Go ahead, Dr. Williams.
I think that with Sharon Osbourne, she responded typically as a non-African American regarding being perceived as being blame. Blame is another issue that prevent dialogue between African Americans and non-African Americans.
Correct.
Perhaps if she had not perceived to be attacked or blamed for something that Piers Morgan said,
Right.
there may have been a different dialogue between Cheryl and Sharon. But blaming is a big wedge between African Americans and non-African Americans regarding racism. So if we can somehow do a different attack, a different approach, I'm not saying Cheryl did it wrong or right, but if the person who's receiving it feel that he or she's been blamed, the person will come very defensive, will shut down completely. And I cover that in my book. You cannot blame non-African Americans about racism or racial relation issues. They will shut down and become defensive.
Right.
But
That was typical. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if she responded differently. That was expected because she was being perceived as being blamed.
Mm-hmm.
But to counter that, though, if I may, you get to a point, and personally, this is where I am. In fact, my last podcast talked about this. You get to a point to where you know that whites in this country have had access to the same information that all of us have had to process over the last 400 years. They know as much as we do that there is a racial problem in this country. They know that they benefit from the ancestors of that racism. And frankly, I'm tired of coddling people. I really am. Because until they are able to actually face the fact, okay, yeah, I didn't have anything to do with it personally, but because of the way the system is set up, yes, I realize that I benefit from it, but how do I make things better? The onus is on them. This is a problem that white America created, and it's a problem that white America is going to have to solve.
Yeah. I agree with you, Mark, because I feel like white people need to get some thicker skin. I mean, when it comes to this kind of issue, because
yes, they do.
I'm like Mark. I am sick and tired of explaining to you why. Now, I hear what you're saying, Dr. Williams, about people shut down, and they do. They do shut down. White people do shut down. One of the things that really concerned me about the exchange between Sharon Osbourne and Cheryl Underwood was I thought that Sharon Osbourne was not only defensive, but she was belligerent to Cheryl Underwood when she talked about, don't you cry.
Yeah.
Almost like you don't have the right to cry here. I thought that was totally inappropriate for her to tell a co-host how she should feel.
But again,
about these circumstances. So again, she was she was showing her racism right there.
Right.
And if you could see it, you could say, okay, I'm done with this.
It was her privilege. She was showing her privilege.
Absolutely. It's clear that there's some racism going on, and the racism is coming from you, Sharon.
Right. And if there had been reality TV, they'd be fighting and the producers would pull them off each other. Hair would have been flying and the whole 9 yards.
Hair out.
Well, can I say something as the white person here? I feel like I'm with you, Mark, with white people. And Keith and I have talked a lot about this lately. Like, I'm on the struggle bus with a lot of white people right now in this country. And I think, first of all, shut up. Second of all, listen. Third of all, humble yourself. I wasn't around of course I wasn't around when slavery existed, but have I been part of the problem for a good part of my life until I went on this journey to learn? Yeah, I have, because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I was complicit. So just be okay with admitting. I don't know. Just be okay with it.
Maybe you can encourage some of your white friends, Renee, because these white people need to get together with white people, and they need to start having these conversations. When black people are in the room, sometimes they feel really uncomfortable, like, oh, I'm not sure what I should say. And, this level of uncomfortability is causing chaos over generations. We are still talking in 2021 about, if you look at the prison industrial complex. I mean, not just individuals, but whole families that have been ruined.
Right.
I live in the city of Evanston, as you know, just recently passed what they call reparations, which I call it a farce. It's nowhere near reparations. It's a housing bill. But it has received national attention.
Yes, it has.
And I think the city of Evanston thinks it's going to be able to get away with calling that reparations and going on about its business.
Right.
No, that was not reparations. So Renee, maybe you can,
spark that conversation.
Some of your friends.
I'm trying, Dr. Greenwell.
Yes.
I know you have to go, so go ahead.
I'm going to say this and I got to leave. And I had the pleasure about almost a year and a half ago of receiving a call one night from a white pastor friend of mine, John Abel. He called me around 11:30 in tears. And he said, I need to sit with you. And he said, I need to, like you were saying, Renee, shut up, listen, and I need to learn from you. I've been complicit in this thing. And what brought that on was in the city of Louisville, Dr. Kevin Cosby was stopped.
Right.
And he asked me,
that.
he said, does this happen to you? I said, yes, it's happened to me twice. Mm-hmm. And so he was like, that's not right. And but again, he said, I've been living in my privilege. And he said, and so what he did, he started this journey like you, Renee. And he and I would get together every 2 to 3 weeks, and we started bringing other people in. Mm-hmm. We brought some other white businessmen in, and we've been meeting every month just to have these discussions. And to be able to, because they've actually looked at some things. There was a show on Netflix with what is her name, with Kerry Washington. It was the where she was married to a white man.
American Son.
And her son was killed. Yeah, I can't remember. American Son. And that was amazing for him. That opened his eyes John opened his eyes. But again, he had tough skin. Like you were saying, Dr. Greenwell, people need to, and like you said, Renee, people have to have this tough skin and be willing to sit down and have these discussions. And we're doing it in the church. We brought our 2 churches together, and we've been meeting like every other month.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's good. It's great.
That is
implicit bias and everything.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Pastor Terry. I know you have to exit, and I think that's where that's going to be our lead in for my next question is, so where do we go from here? Besides having those dialogue and conversations, how are we going to the future generations? Because I can truthfully say, after 2020 riots and uprising, and I'll just pause and say right here, Ms. Tyra Walker, her mother passed away, or she would have been here in this discussion. And because she was a great part and on the front lines for the riots and the marches and the protests and in Louisville, Kentucky in the summer of 2020, especially from the Breonna Taylor incident. So what do we do? The younger generation, they're just not going to stand for it. And I'm telling you, when I saw the marches, they weren't just all African-American children. Nope. There were other race children out there too who says, no, I don't like it. I love everybody. I want us all to get along. And so it wasn't just an audience of just all African-American children. There were other young people there who are like, no, we've got to stop this, and we've got to stop the killing. And they've had quite a few. Yes, they will be the ones to change. But what do we need to do to lead the way so that they do that in a organized manner, in a intelligent manner? What way do we need to do it next?
Well, I just think we need to get out of the way for them, because I think this is a new generation. Now, that doesn't mean that there still aren't young racists out there who are being raised. I mean, I do feel as though sometimes some of those races are just going to have to die off. But I do think that a majority of young people, and I see this at the university, for example, I do see that there are more non-students who are not part of BIPOC or, Black, Native American, Asian, or any of those other quote unquote people of color, white students who are now coming forward and actually speaking truth to power, recognizing some of the historic discrimination and systems of oppression that have occurred, and actually speaking out, not just knowing it, but also standing up and speaking out. So I do see more of that happening among young people, probably not enough. I think we still need more. So I think that there are more and more young people who recognize that this is wrong. It's been wrong. It is wrong, and it will be wrong in the future if if these young people begin to raise their children in a way that doesn't really say that all people are valuable and all people have the right to exist and have the best life possible. So I'm hopeful there. But how quickly it's going to happen,
Mm.
that's the part that's always challenging, is that we don't know how long it's going to take. And yes, we talk about it has to happen in the heart, because, legislating people's change doesn't always work. But the truth is, legislation does matter in terms of what you can and cannot do legally. So one of the points that I wanted to make about police officers is that even though we now are covering these stories more in the news media, we're about to have this trial with Derek Chauvin in Minnesota. And what we really want to look at is, what is the rate of conviction when it comes to police officers who are involved in these kinds of murders? And right now, it's still pretty low. Often, you don't even get an indictment, let alone a conviction.
Right.
And so that's where we have to look as well. Again, we follow the protests, and that's important, but we also need to be following, as news media, what's happening in the court systems, because that's where there's a lot of bias, conscious bias that exists in the court system.
Exactly.
So that's what I would say in the future. I would love to see let's put more emphasis on the systems and how do we make these systems more accountable. And I think in the end, sometimes people say, well, a system is hard to crack, and it is hard to crack. But the truth is, people create systems. So that means you have to crack those people who are making the systems in a way that they can understand that what they are doing needs to change.
Yeah. Dr. Williams?
I would like to see that we start taking initiative to start learning about other people's culture, belief system, music, lifestyle, and invite people to your home, your community. Invite them out for a cup of coffee who is different from you. I think since this is a people problem, identified in the book as a social disease, we need people to start taking initiative and reach out to each other who are different from you. I don't think more laws, legislation, rules, regulations are going to fix this problem. The problem has to be fixed by the people. And people had to start loving each other, caring about each other, getting involved. It's not that it's their problem or it's a black problem. Black crime is a black people problem. No, it's a problem for all Americans. We need everyone involved. We need the women's group involved, the LGBTQ group involved. We need everyone to get involved, hands on deck. So don't just sit back and say, well, this doesn't affect me. It does, because you're American, you live in America. So it's a people problem. It's a social disease. So we need people to start getting to know each other. You see people out in the public, just say hello or give a nod. So what? The person doesn't respond, but you did your part.
Yeah, I'd
So
say
I think the behavior has to change. The behavior has to change, not politicians or legislation. Behavior has to change. There's a maladaptive behavior of the American people regarding racism.
Go ahead, Keitha.
Yeah, I'd say legislation is probably a small part of it, but Renee and I, the reason we started the podcast was to model healthy conversations, to our sphere of influence, to make a change wherever we could. I mean, we're just two mamas in Louisville trying to make a change, in this conversation. And I would totally agree with that. I mean, I think the goal is to unify. I mean, we need to have, our education, our curriculum change to include more cultures, to be more diverse in the way that we're teaching our children. It starts at home, but also we're trying to model the way with our podcast and just having two people come together to discuss these things, like Pastor Terry said. So I think that's where we can continue talking.
Exactly. Renee?
I was going to say, I'm always the yin to Keith's yang. And I say that for both Dr. Greenwell and Dr. Williams, I think it's a healthy mix. Like, we can't change legislation until we change people's behavior. Because the people are the ones voting for our legislatures. And so I think if we can have healthy conversations with people, I know I've changed my vote on certain things based on some things I've learned from other people. So, I think it's both for sure.
Yeah. Mark?
One thing that I'm already seeing, and it's probably one of the healthiest courses of discourse, is on social media apps like TikTok. I am seeing young white people that are actually doing the work in trying to educate. So that makes me happy to see that, and I always support that. I think, and maybe I'm just probably the most militant of the group. The entire system has to be dismantled, brick by brick by brick. It took us 400 years to get to this point. It may take another 400 years in order for it to change, but the system that we have in place, it's not working. Legislatively, as far as businesses go, it needs to be dismantled brick by brick by brick by brick, and something else in place. One of the things that I like that was done in South Africa after the end of apartheid, they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission formed. America needs that.
Yeah.
America needs a national conversation on race to where it's going to hurt, it's going to be painful, it is going to be brutal. And to an earlier point, if folks are getting caught up in their feelings, so be it. It's the conversations that have to be had. And you can either come along for the ride and join the rest of us, or get left behind and lose out on any progress that the rest of us is going to make.
Exactly. Because if the world is going to stand, if our country is going to stand, it's going to have to stand and unified, because united we will stand and divided we will fall. I know that's a saying. It's on, it's on government entities, but it is a real place. I want to first off thank you all for being here for this conversation. I think we could go probably another hour, but I'm going to stop right here. Thank you so much for being a part of this teachable moment. I hope those who are listening now or who will listen on the replays will take the things that we said to heart. Will understand that what you say and what you do does make sense. I was going to add that sometimes you might need a Renee and a Kisa. You need somebody else to say, does that make sense? Or I'm sorry, did you feel like that conversation or what that said? I didn't realize that was offensive. I have to change that, because some things people say and some things people do are, like Dr. Williams said, back culturally. And it's just handed down and you just thought that was okay to say. But in certain areas, and just like when we travel abroad, there are certain things that we do in the US are offensive in other cultures and other countries that would be deemed very offensive. And so therefore we have to learn what each other needs and what it means and how it's interpreted when you're filtering it through another culture or through another perspective or through someone else's eyes. So yes, we do need those conversations, not only conversations, but those painful ones, to say, this is not cool. This is not cute. Do you know where that came from? So just a quick story before we go. So I had two black little girls, fourth graders, fighting. And the one called the other one the inside of a peanut butter cup and the other one was the outside. And so they fought and fought and fought. I was furious. I was mad that they was fighting. And then that meant I had paperwork and I had to call home and the whole 9 yards. So when I got in the teacher's lounge, they were like, well, what happened with that? Well, what's the big deal about one being called the inside of a peanut butter cup and the other one being called the outside? I mean, that's literally the words that they used. And I said, are you sure? And are you sure, sweetie, you really want to know? Yeah, I don't understand. I don't know. I don't know what that is. And I said, you go back to slavery. You go back to the brown bag, the inside. If you're lighter than, so that was a racist over colorism. Exactly. Right. The colorism skin. So, but they had no clue about why two little girls would be fighting over saying that. So, those kinds of conversations of saying, what, or another lady, what's the bottom of his feet look like? Just those kinds of things that people like, I never heard of that before. Is that from the South? Or is that for? So having those conversations that are painful, that really some people in their defense don't have a clue that that's even the way some people, other people perceive them. So teachable moments, we used to have them in the classroom all the time. All right, a teachable moment. So I'm thankful and appreciative for you all being with me this evening. This is sponsored by Envision Radio and Julia Royston Enterprises. I am super, Miss Stacy, you have been with us all night long, and thank you so much for all your wonderful, wonderful comments. But yeah, we have so much to unlearn. You're exactly right. We have so much to not only just unlearn, but so many bricks, as Mr. Mark Gunn says, got to tear down and destroy, and systems to dismantle. Hopefully, it won't take us 400 years, but with conversations like this, being able to be open, honest, and respectful of each other and the cultures and backgrounds, we can make it happen. You all have a fantastic, safe evening. Be blessed in all you do. Be sure to listen in. I'm going to put a shameless plug, envision-radio.com, to all the phenomenal music and wonderful programming where praise meets talk. Envision-radio.com. You all be blessed and have a great night.
Okay.
Thank you.